because you hunt, it doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't make you a conservationist. It doesn't guarantee that you are wise or integral. But what it does do is remove the insulation. We hunt because hunting makes us human. He believed modern life dulls us, not because we're evil or immoral or whatever, but because we're insulated by what he calls consequence. And as he says, hunting drops us back into real circumstance. Welcome back to the Wild Lab, everybody. My name is Ned Weidner, and today I'm taking the mic on a solo episode because I want to talk about one question I get asked all the time. Why do we hunt? Some folks ask it because they're curious. Some folks ask it because they have an accusatory tone. Why do you hunt? They say, and it's just loaded with judgment. And then some folks are genuinely confused because why would I hunt when perfectly good meat down at the local Vons or Trader Joe's? And the truth is, I ask myself this question all the time. Why do I choose to spend months out of the year stalking bears, tracking bears, learning their habits, reading their movements, bending down to study scat or prints as if it's text in the mud? Why do I hike miles into the backcountry to hang trail cameras just to have them knocked down by curious bears and have to hike the same miles back into the backcountry to put them up? Why do I study the choke cherries? Why do I study the pine nuts? Why do I study the gooseberries to find out whether they're ripening early or late or not at all? Why do I practice with my rifle like on a daily basis and tune up my bow? Or sit for hours on ridgetops, glassing burned scars and grassy edges of pine forests, waiting for what seems like days for a Bruin to show up, or maybe not. And why do I do it all willingly and with a smile on my face? That's really the question, right? And I think there's a lot of answers to these questions. A lot of folks talk about conservation. They talk about population control. We talk about tradition. Or meat, fill in the freezers, right? So many people say that's why I hunt, to fill the freezers. And all those things are true. But none of them are the depth. None of them are the root. And I want to go a little bit deeper in this podcast. The deeper answers, or the deeper questions, I say there's at least about 8 by my count, 8 reasons why we hunt. Deeper reasons. But the ones I want to talk about today is perhaps one of the most complicated, perhaps one of the most interesting, and maybe the most uncomfortable for some people. And that's this. We hunt because hunting makes us human. And I don't mean because it draws on our violent tendencies. I don't mean because it affirms our dominance within the world. I mean because it puts us back in relationship, the kind of relationship that formed us as a species in the first place. So check it out. I'm going to do something a little bit different early on this year in 2026. This episode is going to be the first in a multi-part series about the ways in which hunting makes us human. Each episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into one or a couple ways in which hunting makes us human. There's going to be one answer and one thread throughout each of these episodes. Today's episode is going to be my voice. I'm going to be drawing on a lot of the work I researched in my own PhD research dissertation. But in future episodes, I hope to weave in outside voices from experts, from scholars, from hunters, as a way to deepen the perspective. But like I said, today's thread is perhaps the oldest. And here's the thing. To say that hunting makes us human, it's not just a metaphor. It's an evolutionary claim. It's a psychological claim. It's a philosophical claim, right? Because for hundreds of thousands of years, long before agriculture, long before cities, long before these screens that we all communicate on these days, human beings lived inside a predator-prey relationship. I'd say we still do, but we've forgotten it largely. Right? We weren't spectators or managers of this relationship, but we were active co-participants within it. We tracked animals, we followed their patterns, and when we did, trying to hunt them, we failed far more often than we succeeded. But when we succeeded, we carried that success back to our people in the form of food, in the form of shelter, in the form of warmth. A kill meant we could live just a few more days, and we could wrap ourselves in a buffalo hide or a bear hide and warm ourselves throughout the winter. It also meant that we might be able to find a mate or a child that we could sustain life for a little bit longer. Hunting to our ancestors meant survival. And when something means survival, it means it shapes a whole lot about who we are as a species or how what a species is. It shaped our nervous systems. It shaped our attention, our presence, and we're going to get into this much more fully in another episode. It shaped the way we cooperate, the way we work together as human beings collectively. It shaped our myths and our stories. And it shaped our morals and ethics, right? Not just religion, but it's hunting shaped what we believe is right and wrong. So the real question is when we ask why we hunt, what we're really asking is what kind of human beings are we designed to be? Now, let's talk a little bit about how hunting has shaped the human nervous system, our evolutionary design, right? For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival depended upon the ability to track, to predict, and to wait, and to act at exactly the right moment. This required sustained attention, sensory acuity, and emotional regulation, and decision making under uncertainty and under pressure. And for our ancestors, right, no matter where you live, no matter what lineage you come from, these weren't occasional demands, but they were daily ones. And over time, the humans who could remain calm while alert and patient while focused and decisive without freaking out and panic, those were the ones that survived. Those were the ones whose progeny survived. And that pressure, it sculpted a nervous system, our nervous systems, the ones that we live and breathe with today, designed not for constant stimulation, the constant stimulation of the phone and the screen and the podcasts that you're listening to now, but for long arcs of attention, punctuated by short moments of intensity, right? Modern neuroscience, it supports part of this picture, right? Hunting engages and distributed brain networks responsible for attention, prediction, and spatial navigation, motor planning, and emotional control. It relies on what a lot of neuroscientists call predictive processing. So, this is what that means. The brain is constantly updating models of the world based on incomplete information. So, predictive processing, right? As a hunter, we're always orienting what happened here, what might happen next, where did that deer go, where is that deer coming from, where might he be in the future, and what does this landscape, what does this drainage, what does this ridge, where is it going to allow these animals to move through the land? So think about this when you go hunting, when you're whether you're whitetail hunting, you're big game hunting for elk or bear or moose or whatever out west. You got to be able to read the wind. You got to be able to read the terrain, animal behavior, and time. And then you have to adjust your actions moment by moment, right? This is a kind of, we call it predictive processing, but it's a kind of embodied prediction. And it's very different from passive consumption. It's active, it's participatory, and it's deeply regulating. And so hunting, we often talk about like I don't know, we see these hunting memes or hunting videos. Fishing does the same thing, but hunting videos on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever, where it's like all this action packed into 15 seconds, right? Because that's what the algorithm feeds us. I get it. Not blaming hunting creators at all. That's what the algorithm wants. But in those moments, it's we're only capturing those mo- uh, those moments of intensity, those short moments of intensity. But for our ancestors, hunting didn't overstimulate our nervous system as these hunting, memes and videos do. It organizes it. Let me say that again. Hunting organizes our nervous system, right? Simply the act of waiting and predicting and breathing and calm under pressure, it makes our nervous systems more regulated. And this is should be no surprise to any of you who are hunters out there, which I know is many of you, but this is why, and I talked to a lot of people in preparation for this multi-part series, but it's why so many hunters describe the experience of hunting or sitting or stalking or glassing as calming rather than chaotic. Why so many hunters talk to says that it brings them peace because the nervous system is doing what it's evolved to do: focus outward, attune to the environment, attune our bodies to the world around us, and then synchronize our perception with action, meaning take the shot, make the stalk, or maybe in some cases actually go home. But we don't know what action to take if unless we are attuned to the environment and synchronized to it, and hunting allows for that to happen. And so our world today, it is highly fragmented, highly stimulated. I mean, I don't have to tell any of you this. We all know it. We all feel it. But hunting pulls us out of this hyper stimulated, fragmented modern life and back into a rhythm, a natural rhythm of attention and consequence. And it reminds our bodies and our minds, and I would argue our souls, but that's a different argument, how to wait, how to notice, and how to act with care. And so, listen, some people, I think a lot of people, feel that hunting is some way to escape the realities of modern life. And sometimes, maybe perhaps we use it like that. Maybe I've used it like that. We get in a bind, we are having a bad day. Well, I'm going to go out in the woods and glass up some bears. I'm going to go out in the woods and just watch the deer feed through the acorns. And sure, there's a little bit of escapism in there, but actually, more than escape, it's a return to being human, a return to being with the conditions that shaped our humanness, animalness, our speciesness in the first place. And so, look, there's a lot of what that means for embodied attention for the modern hunter. Think about it when you go whitetail hunting. You're constantly bombarded with decisions like where to hunt, where to put this tree stand, I mean, if you're using a feeder, where to do that, when to hunt, what time of day. Do I hunt in the morning? Do I hunt in the night or in the evening? Do I hunt all throughout the day? What weapon do I use? Am I going to shoot a bow? And am I going to shoot a rifle, a shotgun? And, what grain? And yeah, regulations obviously dictate some of this, but not all of it. We have choice. We have freedom within those regulations. But it's more than that. There's things like what to wear, whether, and then most importantly, whether or not to take the shot, that choice. And that's an important one for this conversation when we're talking about the ways in which hunting makes us human. Whether or not we take the shot is immensely important. I'm going to get into that in a little bit later. But when we read the wind and the terrain and the animal behavior, when we're watching a deer feeding through the acorns, which, by the way, my trail cam monitors are my cell phone alerts are popping up as we speak with whitetail walking along the trails. But when we're doing that in real time, we're adjusting our actions moment to moment. I mean, think about anybody who has turkey hunted, right? Maybe you're calling in a turkey, you're sitting on a ridge line, and you're calling in a turkey that's across the ridge, trying to get this uh, this turkey across the ridge, over a creek, away from the hens that he's with, right? And you're calling, you're calling, you're calling. He's not budging. Maybe he comes a little bit and then he goes back. Maybe he comes a little bit and then he goes back, right? And so you have to adjust. Okay, you're like, well, I'm gonna go on this other ridge. He doesn't have to cross the creek. He doesn't have to jump over this fence. It's good. Maybe it'll make it easier. And then he comes. We have to adjust. It's these kind of decisions that we have to think about moment to moment, right? And these things, this decision-making process is part of being human, right? Because these decisions, they're not abstract. They are fully embodied, right? They carry consequence, whether or not we're going to kill that turkey. Now, the consequences in this day and age are a little bit less because, yeah, you can go down to the store and buy some turkey meat. But for our ancestors, they were very, very real, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of embodied attention here. And the one person, one of my favorite philosophers, old school Jose Ortega y Gasset, hunting philosophers at least, the way he talks about it, I love the way he talks about it. So in Meditations in Hunting, Ortega argues that hunting is not primarily about killing. He famously writes that one does not hunt in order to kill. One kills in order to have hunted. What he's pointing to is what I've been talking about here. Hunting restores our embodied attention, and it restores our attunement to the environment, to ourselves, and to everything around us. Because as hunters, we're required to be alert, responsive. We got to pay attention to the wind and the sound and the terrain and the movement. And again, this isn't abstract knowledge, it's embodied knowledge. Hunting trains a type of attention that modern life rarely asks of us. We are not being asked to be active participants in our ecosystems when we're scrolling on our phones or when we're filling out a TPS report or when we're in a boardroom meeting, right? None of the frantic attention of the alerts and the beeps and the deadlines do this, but quiet, sustained presence that stretches over hours, days, weeks, even seasons sometimes when it comes to hunting, that does. And when we're hunting, we are within the tempo of the world. Let me explain what I mean by that. Wind direction matters. The light, our shadow matters. The where we cast our shadow can make a huge difference on whether or not a deer sees us, a bear sees us, or if we're fishing, definitely whether a trout sees us. We learn to notice the small changes, some flattened grass, a broken twig, the absence of bird song in some cases, or some cases, an alarm call of a pine squirrel. Those signals, those sounds, our our nervous system deep down recognizes it, right? We recognize what the absence of bird song means. We recognize what the pine squirrel alarm call means because deep down, we are those animals. We are our ancestors. And when we hear those things, our nervous system reorganizes around those signals. And our attention stops being something that we're forced to pay attention to the boardroom or the meeting or the traffic or whatever it is that we're paying attention to. And it becomes something that we inhabit, right? Long before we were thinkers or consumers, which unfortunately that's what we talk about, how we talk about ourselves these days as consumers. We were watchers, we were listeners, we waited, and we oriented ourselves within living landscapes. When we hunt, we restore that reorientation or that orientation, and we draw our attention out of our heads and back into our bodies, into our breath, into our posture, into our stillness. The thing that I love the most about hunting is that it puts me in contact with the ecosystem. I am nowhere else but sitting on that log or walking in that forest or smelling that pine musk. When I am hunting, I am where I am and I'm within my body and I'm within the ecosystem. And that's, in my mind, that's what one of the ways in which hunting is a practice of being human. It keeps us awake to the moment. It helps us shape our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to wildlife, our relationship to the land around us. And it grounds us in a reality that life, the one that we are living, the one that you and I are living right now as you're listening to this podcast, unfolds right here in front of us and right here within us. Not on a screen, not something to be observed, not something to be abstracted, but something to be lived and felt, to be smelled, to be touched, to be heard. Now, Ortega was writing a long time ago, but he believed modern life dulls us, not because we're evil or immoral or whatever, but because we're insulated by what he calls consequence. And as he says, hunting drops us back into real circumstance. I want you to listen to the way that he talks about it. I'm going to put his own words. Now, this is taken partly from Paul Shepard's Tender Carnivore and the Sacred Game, where he is quoting directly from Ortega y Gasset. These are his words now. In his relationship to other individuals and in his ecological relationship to the whole of the environment, man, the hunter and gatherer, has a great advantage in that the social and environmental perceptions necessary for his way of life are similar to those in which man evolved, so that his lifestyle is the normal expression of his psychology and physiology. His humanity is therefore more fully achieved, and his community is more durable and more beautiful. I mean, listen to this man in Meditations on Hunting, writing a few hundred years ago, saying that hunter-gatherer societies, civilizations are more fully achieved, more durable, and more beautiful. And now he isn't talking in contrast to agrarian societies, which he believes become sedentary and dull us. He continues on. As he says, it is the rich perception and intensity of experience of the world that Ortega says is associated with the hunter's attitude. When one is hunting, the air has another, more exquisite feel as it glides over the skin or enters the lungs. The rocks acquire a more expressive physiognomy, and the vegetation becomes loaded with meaning. But all this is due to the fact that the hunter, while he advances or waits, crouching, feels tied to the earth, to the animal he pursues, whether the animal is in view, hidden, or absence. Thus, his attention is locked into a mystical union with the animal, sensing and a presentiment of that it automatically leads the hunter to perceive the environment from the point of view of the prey, without abandoning his own point of view. For Ortega and Shepard as well, a hunter is a man in touch with the earth and his surroundings. He is a man who is attentive, or a woman in this case, but not when Ortega was writing, but who is attentive, who pays attention to detail, and who has a rich perception and experience of the world that rivals, as he says, a mystical union with the animal. And this is the thing. So many of the people I talked to and interviewed and preparing for this podcast talked about connection. They talked about connection to the land, to the people, to peace, and to themselves. And I think part of what Ortega and Shepard are getting at here with this mystical union with the animal is, or are, those many connections. And for Ortega, he later in his larger philosophy, he writes, I am myself and my circumstances. And what he means by this is that who we become depends on what we must respond to. The wind, a bear, a rugged ridgeline, a burn scar, or in our modern cases, a promotion, traffic, screens, chat GPT. These are the conditions that we respond to. And this is why hunting in the modern world matters, because unlike our ancestors, most of us, the vast majority of us, choose to hunt. We don't have to kill for food. We can go buy meat at the store. And there's a real difference there, right? Because we choose to be shaped by the circumstances of the hunt rather than the circumstances of the boardroom or the video game or the traffic jam. We choose it. And I think we choose it because we like the people we become when we do. To put it bluntly, hunting demands a response that modern life rarely does. Now, I want to talk for a bit about human development and maturity. And I want to do so by reintroducing Paul Shepard. So Shepard has this idea, and we can think of it as like predation as human completion. Now, I really like Paul Shepard. I'm massively biased, but a lot of the information that I shared previously in this episode comes from him. The information I shared about how hunting helps shape the way our nervous system, all of that, or a lot of that, comes from his work. I first encountered him in grad school, and I don't know, maybe it was because he taught in my department, or maybe it was because he lived up this deep canyon that I used to hike in almost daily, but I felt a kindred connection to him, even though I never met the man because he died before I went to school there. But more than that, I never read anyone who writes about hunting or humanity with the honesty and depth that Shepard does. He doesn't romanticize it, he doesn't apologize, he just tells the truth about hunting as he sees it. And for him, hunting is not just cultural, it's developmental. And in his book, The Tender Carnivore and the Sacred Game, and later he writes similar things in a book called Nature and Madness, he makes a bold claim. He says that human beings evolved as predators and our psychological development depends on participating in that role. Let me say that again. Being predators as humans is instrumental to our psychological development as human beings. It's crazy. And so in traditional cultures, right, our ancestors, hunting wasn't optional. We talked about that. But it was also how we talked about the nervous system, we talked about other things, but hunting was also the ways in which adolescents completed their maturation into adulthood because it taught restraint, it taught patience, it taught humility, it taught limits on taking, limits on killing, and most importantly, hunting taught responsibility for death. It wasn't just something that our ancestors did, right? On a weekend, just go out and sit out in the tree stand and wait for a deer to walk under. Rather, it was something that our ancestors grew into. And what do I mean by that? As children, we watched, we were taught how to hunt. We were taught how to track animals, how to read the signs, how to stop and think, well, what does this impression mean in the footprint? Does it mean that the animal was, what emotional state was the animal in? Was he pressed? Was he hurried? Was he going slowly? We were taught to pay attention to the seasons, and we were taught to pay attention to actual animal behavior when we were watching it. And as adolescents, we took on that responsibility, right? Largely through rites of passage and initiation. And at some point, our ancestors took an animal's life, and it was marked as a real threshold. A threshold from being fed by our community, being cared for by our community, being cared for by our mothers, being cared for by our fathers, being cared for by everyone. We, as children, that's what happens. We are cared for, we are nurtured, we are loved in these communities. But when we have an initiatory hunting rite of passage, and cross that threshold into it from adolescence into adulthood and take on the responsibility to hunt, we no longer are the ones who are being cared for. We now become the adults who are accountable for feeding others. And that transition, it wasn't symbolic. It was very, very real. It was concrete. It was embodied. It shaped our confidence. It shaped our emotional regulation, and it shaped our moral seriousness, right? Now, this is some of the things that we do in a modern way at Walker School of the Wild. But traditionally, right, our ancestors, uncles would have came in and taken the boys sometimes out of the bed, or they would have taken them out of the community and they would taken them on a hunt. And it was intentional, it was ceremonial, and it was held within community. And the point of that hunt was a clear demarcation from adolescence into adulthood, a clear demarcation of going from you are no longer being the little boy who is being fed by the community, being fed by your mother, but you are now the one who is going to feed. You are now the one who is going to be accountable for the rest of the community to be fed, for the survival of the rest of the community. And that had some real weight and accountability and responsibility that was embedded within it, right? And it's a part of there. So many things are lost when this type of initiatory rite of passage is lost in our society, right? For Shepard, he writes about this in The Tender Carnivore. He believed that the predator role trained the nervous system to hold fear, aggression, and empathy and patience together. And a successful hunter could not be impulsive or reactive. We had to stay alert while focusing without rushing, right? And he believed that when that pathway disappeared, the predator just didn't disappear with it. It went untrained. So what does that mean, right? That means that we all have a predator living within inside of us, right? And without the initiatory rite of passage, so that we come in contact with that predator and understand it and embrace it as a part of ourselves, it becomes untrained, it becomes untenable, and it becomes dangerous, right? One of my mentors always says, be be a danger, but not dangerous. Or be dangerous, but not a danger, right? And what he means by that is this, like, if we embrace the predator, because we all, us men, have it within us, right? We have that warrior mentality and within us, that warrior archetype within us. If we embrace it, it becomes safe. Yes, it becomes something that can be potentially dangerous, but it does not become a danger. It does not become a threat to the other people in our society because we can hold it. We can hold the power that it is, right? But when it goes untrained, that's when we have things what we call toxic masculinity, or we call, men being a problem in this world, or whatever. It's because not always, but it's one of the reasons is because we haven't embraced that hunter, that predator, that warrior within us, right? And so when we lose that, when hunting disappears from daily life and that initiation, that threshold from boyhood to manhood disappears, we don't become gentler as a society. We don't become kinder. We become what Shepard and so many others call biologically adult, but psychologically adolescent. We become unfinished or stunted. And that's where we are in modern society. Instead of these rituals, instead of these initiations, we have slaughterhouses. And instead of participating in a hunt, we consume meat gluttonously. And instead of killing something to provide for our family, to provide for our tribe, killing becomes somebody else's problem. Death. Death goes away. Well, it doesn't actually go away. It doesn't actually vanish. It just gets hidden. It gets brushed under the rug and something that we don't have to deal with. And when that happens, we as a people, collectively, we as a people don't, men, women alike, we don't cross that threshold from boyhood to manhood, from girlhood to womanhood, right? We don't collectively mature. We might gain knowledge, we might gain power, we might gain status, but we never fully complete the psychological transition into adulthood, which is, and we can see the consequences of this all over the place, right? Um, Hunting, however, served as a fundamental rite of passage for into adulthood. But it cultivated a sense of care for our elders that Shepard says, well, not absent in agrarian societies, it was definitely lessened in their hunting counterpart societies, right? Let me hear you. I want you to hear it in his own words. Conscientious care of the weak and disabled did not leap into the human heart from nowhere. As the patterns of sharing and care emerged, the group came to depend on those too old or infirm to hunt or gather for the performance of certain tasks. Old people, like old apes and baboons, came to be respected for their experience and wisdom and were voluntarily followed as leaders. Respect for the aged is a widespread trait among human peoples, though not unique to them. Among peasant and industrial societies, it is much more variable. Some people only only the shell of respect may give security, but only token status. So this is why Shepard is so critical of modern society, or one of the reasons. Not because it was evil, but because it was ecologically amputated and psychologically immature. We hid death, and our elders became dismissed. Our boys never became men, and humans stopped evolving to a sense of presence. And Shepard believed, and I got to agree with him on this one here, that this was not progress, but rather pathology. The truth is, I could spend days talking about the ways hunting has made us human. The art it inspired, the myths it generated, the way, like, listen, our language itself is evolved in part through hunting. And I'm going to go into that in a later episode, but I'm going to talk to it briefly about it here. You see, hunting didn't just shape our bodies, our nervous systems, our cultures, it also shaped our imagination. Some of the earliest evidence of the human culture appeared deep underground in places like Lascaux caves, right? Roughly 17,000 years ago, people entered those caves and they were carrying pigment, they were carrying fire, and they were carrying some intention. And if you haven't seen the pictures, what they chose to paint is really important here. The walls of Lascaux Cave, right? They were filled with animals, with bison, with horses, with aurochs, with deer. And these pictures, they were rendered with some amazing precision for the time, considering what they were working with. But the really interesting thing is that humans were nearly absent from these paintings. Have you ever seen Cave of Forgotten Dreams? Werner Herzog talks about this here, right? In a different cave system, he suggests that it may be here, surrounded by images of hunted animals, that the human soul first flickered into existence. And I want to pause right there for a moment. Herzog is suggesting that human imagination, the capacity for symbol or myth and meaning, it emerged through representations of animals in the hunt. And myth making, listen, it is no small thing. Cultures, belief systems, ideologies, our moral codes, and entire civilizations, they're built on myth. They're built on the stories that we tell ourselves. Myth and story, it's how we make sense of what it means to be human, how we make sense of life and death. And listen, we can see this clearly in hunting myths across a lot of different cultures. On the plains here in America, the buffalo, they were not just food, they were relatives. The Lakota believed that the buffalo gave themselves to the people, but only if humans lived rightly and hunted with restraint, gratitude, and if they hunted with ceremony. The hunt was a covenant made between humans and animals. In the Pacific Northwest, we see the same thing. Salmon were understood to be the salmon people, or beings who returned each year offering themselves to the natives, but only if honoring properly. Things like waste and arrogance or forgetting the ceremony, meaning by placing the bones of the first salmon caught into the earth, the salmon would not return the next year. And as Shepard argues, this myth wasn't some sort of entertainment, but it was ecological wisdom. Stories and the way they taught humans how to live and taught humans how to feed themselves and taught humans how to live in a world where life feeds on life without destroying the whole dang thing. That was true ecological wisdom, right? And this is where we get some of our accountability, some of our moral codes, right? Because hunting didn't make humans dominant. It put us in relationship with animals and the rest of the ecosystems. It made us accountable. And it also gave us a reason to speak. We talk about the ways that hunting shaped language. Unlike gathering societies, hunting requires you to talk about what is not present. Think about where animals were yesterday or where they might be in the next day, what the wind is doing or what it might do. It required a coordination that required some sort of symbolic thought and narrative and stories about what is happening on the land or what could possibly happen on the land, right? And then once we developed those, we also had to teach those across generations so that younger children who became adolescents and eventually became adults, they could learn it not only by instinct, but from their elders, right? This required instruction. And obviously, for instruction, we need words. And once we had words, we had to develop some systems. And these systems, these words, these languages, they were passed on through storytelling around the fire, right? Because let's face it, when with a hunt, there's a ton of drama. There's this tension, there's loss, there's success, there's uncertainty. And we retold these stories. They were like encoded lessons. They're full of ethics and memory. And when we sat around the campfire, hunters and villagers and tribesmen sat around the campfire, we were sitting at the crossroads of human evolution. This was the birth of culture. Hunting stories were the birth of culture because they were the stories that shaped us into the people that we are, right? Not just our nervous systems, but our ethics, our codes, our morals. And as I said, was a sort of ecological wisdom. These stories, they shaped us in our ecological wisdom because they placed us in relationship, right? That relationship with animals, with bears, with deer, with the land. And I want to pause on this for a second. I want to pause on this idea of ecological wisdom because what it really is saying is that hunting developed humans or helped develop humans' moral codes and ethics through a relationship with the wildlife and the ecosystem. If you look at many of these old indigenous hunting stories, they don't make humans dominant. They're stories that put us in relationship with the world and they make humans accountable. This is the baseline of morals and ethics. And maybe that's why animals appear at the center of our earliest myths. Because before we learned how to explain the world, we had to learn how to belong to it. So, what does this all mean for the here and now at the turn of the 2026? It means the question of how does hunting make us human can't be separated from a more uncomfortable one. What kind of people are we becoming? Modern life trains us, no doubt, but it trains us in very specific ways. It trains us for comfort without competence. All you got to do is turn on IG or TikTok for one moment and you can see that. Or it trains us for consumption without responsibility. Simply go to a Walmart or a Costco or any grocery store across the United States and you'll know what I mean. An opinion without experience. I don't know if you've checked out our political system lately, but if you do, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. We've gotten used to ease and then we've outsourced our consequences to the slaughterhouses. And so many of us speak loudly about things that we've never had to live inside of. But hunting trains us for something different. It trains patience and humility, attention and care and gratitude. It trains presence. And it doesn't do any of this perfectly or automatically. Listen, if you just because you hunt, it doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't make you a conservationist. It doesn't guarantee that you are wise or integral. But what it does do is removes the insulation that modern world provides. It places you in the conditions where goodness has to be practiced, where patience matters and where restraint matters. And where your actions, whether or not you kill the animal or not, those actions carry weight. And if you don't meet those conditions and the hunt fails, well, then the relationship fails. And you feel it deep down immediately. And this matters not just for those of us who hunt, but it matters for how hunting is talked about, how it's portrayed, and how it's carried forward, how we represent it on IG, how we represent it on TikTok and documentaries and videos, because the way we speak about hunting, it shapes how people understand it. And how people understand it, it shapes culture. We may not be around the campfire anymore, but hunting is still shaping culture. But whether or not hunting remains this place of responsibility and reverence and restraint, or whether it becomes just another form of consumption, which I fear that it is becoming, depends on how we choose how to emphasize, what stories we choose to tell, and who we choose to become through the hunt. And this, my friends, is why we built Walker School of the Wild. Not to create hunters, but to create initiated men and women. Men and women who know where their food comes from, who can sit with uncertainty, and who can fail without collapsing into a heap. And people who can take responsibility for life and death. And as we move into the new year, we're reopening enrollment all across all Walker School of the Wild programs. Every course, every training, every retreat is rooted in the same question. How do we become more fully human in a world that keeps pulling us away from that? Listen, if this episode stirs something, and if you feel that pull towards attention and responsibility and embodied life, this is your invitation to check out some of the offerings we have available at Walker School of the Wild in 2026. And I'm going to close with this. When people ask me why I hunt, these are the points I start with. Not with the politics. I don't start with identity politics or being defensive, but I start with this kind of honesty. Because I hunt because I like the person I become when I'm shaped by the conversations with the wind and the animals and consequences instead of being shaped by screens and schedules and abstractions. And like I said, this is part one of a multi part series on the ways in which hunting makes us human. In coming episodes, we're going to talk more about myth making, about rites of passage, about cultural codes and presence, and about the ways hunting teaches us about death and conversation or conservation and food and the ways in which hunting connects us to place. Today, I wanted to keep it simple. We hunt not because it's easy or because it's clean, but because it places us back inside the web that formed us. We hunt because it makes us human. If you felt yourself somewhere in this conversation today and want to get out into the wild, come join us. We got a lot of new things coming up in the new year. We have Primal hunts October 1st and 4th and November 5th through the 8th. These are opportunities for you to deepen your work as a man, as a hunter, as a human, as an outdoorsman. They're group hunts for black bear in the Eastern Sierra of California, and we hunt deep into the wild. And you're going to be pushed to your limits. These are opportunities to learn not only how to hunt bear, how to track bear, but also how to woo the things that you want in your own life, where you're going to be surrounded by a group of brothers that will hold you in intention with the work that we will be doing over the course of those weekends. And I can promise you this: you will not come away from those weekends, from our primal hunts, unchanged. If you want more information about any of those, you can hit us up online at Step Into Your Wild or at any of the socials, right? We're also running our Backcountry Fly Fishing Academy July 9th through the 12th. This is where folks learn how to read a river. They learn how to cast a fly line, and you have an opportunity to catch a native Lahontan cutthroat trout in one of the most spectacular places on earth, and certainly in California. These are super fun trips for both men and women alike. So again, hit us up online, any of our socials, Step Into Your Wild. And then I have a few, and I mean very few spots open for 2026 individual bear hunts, individual hunting mentorships. So if you want to get out in the wild with me personally and you want to do some work hunting black bear in the wilds of the Eastern Sierra, hit me up online at Step Into Your Wild. And listen, before you do, know that these hunts aren't just for everybody. You will be pushed. They are difficult. And if you're not ready to push yourself to both your physical and sometimes emotional limits, then you're probably not ready for this trip. If you're ready for some real intimate work in the wild, hit us up. All the details are in the show notes. You can find us at www.stepintoyourwild.com or on all the socials at Step Into Your Wild. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay wild.